Today we're going to work with Dasamsa in respect to directions. And it's a tricky business to consistently, meaning every single the direction something will come from based on the Dasamsa. And one reason for that is because the Dasamsa, being the chart of great fruits, the biggest things that happen, is mostly going to pertain to the directions of things that are large, bigger influences in your life. Also, you'll find you'll need to use the conditional dashas as well, and that will improve your accuracy in deciding when something important is going to happen, or what direction something important will come from. But the example I'm going to use today is, marriage partners, the person that people eventually end up marrying. Because meeting that person is usually always going to be one of the biggest things that happens to you during any dasha or antardasha. So chances are, if you meet someone in a certain dasha, and you marry that person, that's probably the biggest event for you during that dasha and antardasha. Not always the case, but usually marriage is going to be one of the bigger events. So it'll show the directions quite well based on the Dasamsa. But as you see, as we go do a couple charts here, you see it's still difficult business to get the direction. In fact, the toughest thing in astrology is always getting those details, directions and colors and sizes. The details are one of the more difficult aspects. It's actually more difficult to work with details than it is with timing. Most astrologers just work on trying to time events, and just pretty much ignore the realm of details. But details is another thing we can predict, and of course direction is a detail. But it's a difficult thing to predict, and there's two reasons for that. One reason is, just like timing's difficult to predict, timing affects details. So, for instance, at one point in your life you might drive red cars, and another point in your life you might drive blue cars. So your chart's going to have to show blue and red cars. And now you have to time when the red ones are going to come and when the blue ones are going to come. So predicting details also has to do with predicting timing things. You're timing when the detail is going to be that color or whatever. And so details is really tricky because you're really doing two things. You're predicting timing and you're predicting details. Okay? And that makes it harder than simply predicting the time of an event by itself. So predicting you're going to get meet your spouse in this dasha and antardasha is one thing. But then predicting the qualities of that spouse is going to be tougher than predicting the time usually. So details is tough, but it's satisfying when you do it. And the other thing is, if you do predict details, when the event happens for the person, they're so much sure that it was the prediction that you made. So if you predict to a person you're going to get a car in 3 months and it's going to be red, well, if they just get a car in 3 months and you just predicted you'll get a car in 3 months, they'll go, wow, that was pretty cool, the astrologer predicted it. But, chances are they might have got a car in 3 months anyway. But if you say you're going to get a red car in 3 months, then they get a red car in 3 months, and it's like, wait a minute, wow, it's actually red, And so that makes it look like it was astrologically more foretold, because there's less of a chance of getting a red car in 3 months than just getting a car in 3 months. But also sometimes details are helpful when a person's trying to make decisions. Should I take the job on the east or the west? I'm interested in 2 girls. One's on the east, one's on the west. Which one should I pursue? So sometimes working out the details can be helpful to help people make choices in their lives. Okay? So, in astrology, there's always several factors that rule something. So, for instance, for our relationship partners, in a woman's chart is Jupiter. In a man's chart, it's Venus is the spouse. So that's one factor, the Karaka. Then we have to look at the Gemini Karaka. In Gemini, the Dara Karaka, the planet with the least amount of degrees in its sign, is going to be a planet representing the spouse. In this case, it's Mercury. Then we have the Lord of the Bhava is going to represent that spouse, that thing. So in this person's chart, Rashi chart has a Taurus Lagna with Scorpio on the 7th. Therefore, Mars is going to represent their spouse. And then also the Lord of the bhava in the pertinent bhava is going to be important for the spouse or for whatever. So in respect to the spouse, that means the Lord of the seventh, the Saptamsha, is Venus. So we've got, in this person's chart, we have 4 planets that represent the spouse. They're female, so Jupiter represents the husband or the male spouse, male partner. Venus, the Lord of the seventh in the Saptamsha. Mars, the Lord of the seventh in the Rashi. And Mercury, the Dara Karaka, the Jaimini Karaka of spouse. Okay? So any of those 4 planets can possibly represent a direction the spouse may come from. Okay, so the first thing we can do, we can say, okay, what's probably going to be the best direction that the spouse can come from? And we can go to the Dasamsa, and we can analyze those planets. Let's pull up our planetary aspects here. Let's start with the natural Karaka, which is Jupiter in a woman's chart. In the Dasamsa, Jupiter sitting in a friend sign. But his friend's sun is sleeping, so he's not going to get any bolster from that. So Jupiter just starts out real medium. He's aspected by the sun, but the sun is sleeping, so can't help. He's aspected by his enemy Mercury to 27 points, and Mercury can hurt him because Mercury's in a natural neutrals. He's aspected by an exalted Venus, who's really going to hurt him, and he's aspected by a neutral Saturn. But he's got 2 enemies, Mercury and Venus, aspecting him, so Jupiter's starved. Okay? So a spouse from the direction that Jupiter falls into would not likely be a spouse that they would find the greatest, most fulfilling thing. Jupiter's in the Padmaja direction, which is the creative, direction, which when it comes to a spouse, that would mean deciding what spouse you want, writing it down on paper, and going and finding the spouse. Really creating that spouse out of what your desires are. If the person tried to get their spouse through that method, they would not find a spouse that was suited to them because Jupiter's too starved. Okay? So this person's want list is not going to be really helpful for them figuring out a spouse based on that. The other planet that represents spouse is the Jaimini Karaka, which is Mercury. Mercury's in a natural neutral sign in the Dasamsa. Mercury's aspected by his enemy moon. Okay? But the moon is, Mercury's in a watery sign, so that will just thirst Mercury and not starve Mercury. So Mercury's feeling a lack, but he still can be somewhat productive. Neutral Mars aspects, neutral Jupiter aspects, his friend Venus aspects, so a little bit of delight there. And then neutral Saturn aspects. Then the Sun is aspected or conjunct the Mercury and the Rashi, so Mercury gets some agitation. So Mercury's agitated, thirsty, and a little delighted. But it's mostly, the biggest influence is agitation of the Sun. But the Sun is sleeping in the Dasamsa, so that removes it. So the biggest influence is the Moon thirsting Mercury. So a spouse from the direction, the natal direction, which could be your hometown or a place you see as home, because that's what's right below your feet. Or it could be an ancestral place. An ancestral place, because the 4th house represents your ancestors and the family that's come before you. So your ancestral place and property or country could be indicated by the 4th house as well. Okay? A person from that direction would cause them some thirst, moon aspecting, some lack, a little bit of delight because of Venus making a little aspect. And Venus is exalted at least, so that will help a little bit, but it's only 3 points, whereas the moon is, in its Mula Trikona at 29 points, giving it a big dose of trouble. So there's definitely going to be a lack in a spouse coming from the direction of Mercury's Dasamsa, which is hometown or ancestral place, or a place that they feel a familiarity with. Okay? Then, the 7th Lord in the Saptamsha, 7th Lord in the Rashi chart is Mars. How's Mars doing in that Dasamsha? Mars is in a natural friend sign. It's a natural neutral sign. It's aspected by the sun, who's sleeping, who can't help, by its enemy Mercury, by its friend Jupiter, who's can help because he's in a friend sign, by neutral Venus and neutral Saturn. But then he's conjunct the moon in the Rashi chart, and the moon's in Mula Trikona. So the moon is really delighting Mars. So Mars is actually quite delighted. He gets a little bit hurt by Mercury to 4 points, and it's a strong exalted I'm sorry, not that chart, this chart. He's aspected by Mercury, but Mercury's a minor aspect. So Mars is mostly delighted by the moon. Mars is also sleeping in its own sign. So that means the spouse can't do great things for them. But the moon is going to delight Mars anyway. Okay? Keep that in mind. That's an important part of this. Now, Mars is in the northeast direction, and Mars is delighted. He's sleeping, but ends up being delighted. So they'd be better off with a man from the northeast direction so far. Okay? Although, because Mars is sleeping in the Dasamsa, that man would be somewhat, sleeping. He wouldn't be the most aggressive, let's go do it type person. But the moon, which rules Mars, would keep things delighted and happy anyway, which means the person's own efforts, because the moon has to do with what you hope for, what you plan on doing. It's a self-planet, basically. Okay. Then, the last planet, seventh lord in the Septamsha is Venus. Venus is exalted in the Dasamsa. Venus is aspected by sleeping sun, hurt by moon, his enemy, by neutral Mars, helped by Mercury, and then starved by Saturn. But Saturn's sleeping in the Dasamsa, so can't starve him. So Venus is mostly Garvita, proud, due to that exaltation. Okay, it gets a little bit of hurt from this moon and Saturn, but Saturn's sleeping, so can't really hurt him in the Dasamsa, luckily. So Venus looks like a pretty good planet too. Venus also represents the northeast, just as does Mars. So we see a strong theme of northeast direction for the possible spouse or marriage to come into play. Okay? That if we had to recommend a direction over those 4 directions, northeast is better, because Mars and Venus, the northeast planets, do better than Mercury or Jupiter. Okay, so northeast direction planet is going to be best. Okay? Now, I just want to pull something up from my memory here. Okay. Okay. This person met their spouse in Saturn-Venus Dasha. Okay? Now, one of the tricky things about predicting the direction of something is that the Lord of the Karaka, and even the Nakshatra Lord of the Karaka, or the planet, the Dasha of that Lord can decide the direction. So, say Saturn had some 7th house influence somehow, okay, by ruling one of these 7th lords or whatever, okay? It only has a really weak 7th lord influence in that it rules the 7th in the Dasamsa. Now, Saturn represents the southwest direction, but Saturn's sleeping in the Dasamsa. The Antardasha Lord Venus is exalted, and we've seen one of the better planets in the Dasamsa. So, a sleeping planet is not going to be able to give its direction as much as an awake planet, a better planet. So, in this case, it's quite obvious that the Antardasha Lord is going to be much more prone to indicate the spousal direction when it comes to giving a great spouse. Now, why is that? Well, because Saturn by himself can't really give a great spouse. Why? Well, because in the Septamsha, well, I'll start with the Navamsha. In the Navamsha, Saturn's in Cancer, where it's sleeping. Okay? Then Saturn is starved or thirsted by moon. He's Mercury sleeping, so can't help. And Venus in the Navamsha is helping. He's exalted and conjunct Saturn in the Rashi chart. So Venus is delighting Saturn, but otherwise Saturn's thirsty. So in the Navamsha, the planet of marriage, Saturn is just not really great. Okay, he's sleeping. The thing that bails him out is Venus. And Venus, we've seen, is also a spousal planet. Okay, so Saturn Dasha is just not going to be able to indicate the direction that well. Even in the Saptamsha, Saturn's in a difficult house, the 12th house. He's in a natural neutral sign. This time he's starved by, or thirsted by Moon a little bit, thirsted by Mars a bit. Mercury helps him. So he's okay, but Venus is also pretty good in that chart. Venus is in a natural friends or neutral sign, so it's nothing helps there. But he gets a good dose from Mercury, and then he's starred by Saturn, who's okay. So in the Navamsha, Venus is better than Saturn. In the Saptamsha, Saturn's better than Venus. In the Dasamsha, Venus is obviously better. Okay. So when it comes to the directions, the direction of the biggest things, the Dasamsha, though, is more important. And here Venus really shines much better. So Venus, they both have a 7th house influence. Venus is a more important 7th house influence because it rules the 7th in the Saptamsha, whereas Saturn just rules the 7th in the Dasamsha, which is important in the context of determining directions, though. Okay, and in fact, in Saturn Dasha, the majority of Saturn Dasha, this person was dating men from the southwest. That never quite really worked out, which is Saturn's direction. Okay? In Saturn Venus, they met a man from the northeast, the direction of Venus, and also the direction of 7th Lord in the Rashi, Mars. Okay? And the direction we've seen is the better direction for getting a spouse. So they actually met their spouse in Saturn Venus, and Venus, that's the best direction for them. Okay? Now, so they were sort of fortunate. The planet that gave them the person was a planet that was better for that direction. Okay? Now in Ashtatari Dasha, they married the person in Ashtatari Dasha. They met him under Venus, Saturn, Venus, and Vimshatri. They actually married an Ashtatari of Saturn, Venus. So it was sort of interesting that the same Dasha kind of had a lot of focus on relationships, the same Dasha Bhukti. And the reason that is because Saturn is not really great in the Navamsha, but it gets bailed out by Venus. Venus is his exalted friend really helping him. And Venus is helping Saturn in the Saptamsha too. So it's a good helpful planet to Saturn. Okay? Alright, and of course Saturn rules the 10th sign in the Navamsha chart. It's the 10th Rashi, the 10th cusp, the action in marriage. And it's not very good himself, like we've seen Saturn is sleeping, but then Venus is the friend that bails Saturn out. So Saturn-Venus is the high point of her relationship moving forward. But no, you bet, that Saturn is not going to give the happiest marriage in Saturn Dasha. The marriage was not an easy one. And throughout Saturn Dasha, there were one time where they almost separated. But this Venus, which is what met them in Saturn-Venus from Kshatriya and married them in Saturn-Venus, this other Dasha, very much helped to, that Venus friend of Saturn kept Saturn alive. And of course, in the Navamsha, Saturn's thirsty because he's in a watery enemy sign. And all the enemies aspected in it are going to thirst Saturn, not starve Saturn. And remember, a thirsted Saturn, a thirsty planet suffers and doesn't feel happy. But a starved planet is what lets things fall apart and get destroyed. So the Saturn is not happy. It's only happy when Venus helps him, which is when they met and married. But Saturn won't destroy things, luckily. Okay, if Saturn was conjunct an enemy in the Rashi, then Saturn Dasha would have destroyed something. But aspects to a planet in a watery sign, aspects of enemies to a planet in a watery sign only thirst it. They don't destroy it by starving it. So emotionally, it wasn't the happiest marriage. There was definitely a lot of lack. The client complained to me about their spouse a lot during that time. But they got through it to go on to a more productive, more enjoyable dasha down the road. Okay? All right, so that's how we can kind of see this direction. Now, it would have been possible that the worst direction of Jupiter, let's say, might have been the person they married, and then they would have been actually a lot less happy overall. They wouldn't have been as good, but they got the person from the best direction possible for this person, which was northeast. So with directions, we can do two things. We can see what direction they're inclined to get the most favorable thing from. And then when the dasha gives something, we can try to guess the direction the thing is found. Okay? Okay, here's another one. The planets that represent relationships in this person, this is a man, so Venus is a key planet. Okay? Let's see how Venus is in the Dasamsa. In the Dasamsa, Venus is in a natural neutral sign. Venus is conjunct his friend Mercury, who's sleeping, who therefore can't help. He's conjunct the Sun, who's sleeping in the Dasamsa, so not going to affect the greatness of something coming from a direction. Then Venus is aspected by his friend Saturn to 54 points and his neutral Mars. Saturn's in a natural friend sign, so Saturn's going to help Venus. So the Venus direction could give a spouse that this person is relatively delighted in. And that would be the north direction because they have their Venus in the Kubera Navamsa or Dasamsa. Okay? So Venus direction looks pretty good. The other direction that would be important would be the direction of the Darakaraka. That's Saturn. Saturn's in a friend sign. Saturn's starred by the Sun, who's sleeping though. He's starred by the Moon a bit. Mars is sleeping, so can't starve him. Mercury's sleeping, so can't help him. Jupiter's neutral, and Venus is a friend who can help. And so Saturn's actually okay in the Dasamsa as well. So a spouse from the direction of the south could also be a great thing that helps in their life. Okay? Then the seventh lord in the Rashi chart is the moon. The moon is in the east direction, in the Indra Dasamsa, which is east. So what's the chances of someone from the east being a great thing in their life, really truly great? Well, the moon's in a natural friend sign, but that friend is, or in a neutral sign, and that friend is sleeping, or neutral sleeping. So moon's just really average in the Dasamsa. Aspected by the Sun who's sleeping, by his neutral Venus and neutral Saturn. So this is a totally flat moon. It's not indicating a spouse from the east would really be ungreat, but it's not indicating any greatness due to that spouse. Very average how great the spouse will be from the east. The seventh lord in the Septamsha is Jupiter. Jupiter's in the northwest direction. Okay? In the northwest direction is Jupiter. Jupiter in the Samsha is sleeping, first of all. So that's not going to be good. Okay? Then Jupiter is conjunct his friend Mars in the Rashi, who's sleeping in the Dasamsa, who therefore can't help Jupiter. Then Jupiter is aspected by his friend Sun, who's sleeping, his enemy Mercury, who's sleeping, his enemy Venus, who's already starving him by Jupiter being in it, and by Saturn, his neutral. But Jupiter is starved. He's in his enemy sign, and his enemy has enough strength to starve him. He has no good influences on him. that all his friends are sleeping in that chart. So Jupiter's starved. It's a bad Jupiter. So getting a spouse from the northwest direction, Jupiter's Dasamsa, would be a spouse that would be the least great. Okay? Then from the east direction of the moon, it would just be really flat, not particularly good or bad. The north direction of Venus and the south direction of Saturn both have some more delight. So they'd be best off with a spouse from the north or south. And they would have the best relationship with the spouse from the north or south. It would be the greatest relationship. Okay? So those are the 4 possibilities. Now, unfortunately for this person, they first got married under the influence of the moon. Okay? The moon is the 7th lord in the Rashi. And the moon we've seen is the east. It's just so-so. It's not really unfortunately, but they didn't get it in the dasha of Venus or Saturn. The moon dasha married him the first time, and they married a girl that was east of them. And then they later divorced, and then in an antardasha of the moon down the road, they married again, once again a girl from the east of them. So they married twice, both times from the east. And so this person, the dashas didn't let them marry the best person from a particular direction. Even though the Venus and Saturn directions, the north or south, would be, better to get their spouse from that direction, they just didn't get it. The dashas conspired against them, and they got it under the moon every time. Either the moon dasha or the moon antardasha. And they got spouses from the east instead. And so it wasn't the best possibility they could get. Now, Vimshatri dasha, this person just went into Venus dasha, and they are actually hoping, even though they're old now, they're hoping for a possibility of a third marriage. If they do, this will be their best marriage because of the fact that Venus is, in the east, in the north, they get someone from the north, and it would be a better marriage because Venus is a greater planet in the Dasamsa. So how great is the marriage going to be? Well, Venus will give a greater one than the moon would be. But at least they never married under Jupiter, which would have been really bad. Then they would have got a woman from the northwest, most likely. And that woman would have been, he would have had the least best great relationship with her because Jupiter is starved in the Dasamsa. Okay? So if this person came to us and said, look, I'm writing a girl on the east and I'm writing a girl on the northwest, we'd say take the girl on the east. If he says, I'm also I just met a girl from the north, which is Venus's direction, or a girl from the south with the Saturn's direction, I would say, well, forget both the other girls and go for the north or south girl. So we could give the person some practical advice, sometimes just seeing which directions are more favorable. And you can do that for all things. A person has different job opportunities. Look at the work planet. Look at the sun. Look at Saturn. Look at the 10th Lord. Look at the AMK, that Mataya Karaka, which is about getting your resources and finances together. And see what directions, which of those is the best and what direction that is. And go in the directions of things that are most favorable. Okay? So on this person's assumption, let's just take a minute to find the best planet. Okay? The best planet is Venus was pretty good. Saturn was pretty good, I think. Sun was starved and didn't have any friends to help him. Moon didn't have any friends to help. Moon was flat. Mars is starved. Mercury is thirsty. Jupiter is starved. Venus is let's see. Venus is delighted by Saturn. Venus looks good. Moon is hurting Saturn a little bit. I would say Venus is the best planet so far. Yeah, I would say Venus in this chart's the best planet. Okay? Venus is the north direction. So in general, this person's going to do best with Venetian things from the north, and also anything Venetian anything that's ruled by Venus. Okay? Venus rules Jupiter. Okay? Which is the karka for children. It's a karka for wealth, spirituality. So this person wanted to embrace a philosophy. They could do it through Jupiter, which is not good, and Jupiter's direction is the northwest, or northern philosophy, or a philosophy from a teacher in the north, which is ruled by Venus, because Venus rules Jupiter. As a ruler, it can also indicate directions of Jupiter's things that would be better. Okay? So, this is just some examples of how you can use these directions. So anything Jupiter related or Venus related, you want to tell them to look for those things in the north. Okay? And anything Jupiter related, you want them to tell them to stay out of the northwest. Okay? Because the northwest is Jupiter's direction, and Jupiter's in a starved state. Okay, so things from the northwest are just going to be painful and frustrating overall. Okay, hope that helps you guys get started on looking at directions. Just do it just like this. Find the planets that rule that thing, and then find out what directions they are in. And then which of them have better Logitadya Avashtas, and the one with the best Logitadya Avashta is going to be the direction you want to pursue that thing from. Okay? All right. And also you can, use Baba Lords too. So philosophically speaking, we've got Jupiter. We've got the ninth Lord. That's, when it comes to like the gurus. So Venus is their ninth Lord in the Rashi chart. So Jupiter's teachers, Venus's teachers. They have choice of teachers from the north or teachers from the northwest, which is Jupiter. They'll do better with teachers from the north. So they want to pursue learning from teachers from the north. Okay? All right. Hope that helps. I hope you have fun with these directions to try to add some details to your charts. Thank you.